I'm Maurice Lim, 28, a freelance graphic designer, working out of my small apartment studio. The knock came at 3:17 a.m., sharp and deliberate against my door like someone trying to wake the dead without waking the neighbors. I froze at my computer, the glow of the design software casting blue shadows across my face as I listened to my 4-year-old son Danny's breathing through the baby monitor. 3 knocks.
Pause.
3 more knocks. The same pattern my parents used when I was little, and they'd check on me after nightmares. But my parents hadn't spoken to me in 4 years. The coffee in my mug had gone cold hours ago, bitter dregs clinging to ceramic as I set it down with trembling fingers. Outside, Seattle's autumn rain drummed against the windows of our tiny one-bedroom apartment, each droplet catching the streetlight like falling stars. The smell of wet concrete and dying leaves seeped through the old window seals, mixing with the lingering scent of Danny's bedtime storybooks and the faint vanilla candle I'd burned earlier to mask the smell of instant ramen. Who knocks like that at 3 in the morning? Before I go further, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and if you're hooked already, a like and subscribe will keep these stories coming. I crept toward the door, my bare feet silent on the worn hardwood floors Danny and I had learned to navigate without creaking. The peephole revealed 2 figures hunched under a shared umbrella, their faces obscured by shadow and rain. But something about their posture, the way the woman clutched her purse against her chest while the man stood with his hands clasped behind his back, sent recognition shooting through my spine like ice water. Maurice? My mother's voice, muffled by the door, but unmistakable. We know you're awake. We can see the light. My hand hovered over the deadbolt. For years of silence. For years of raising Danny alone while working 16-hour days to keep us fed and housed. For years of him asking why he didn't have grandparents like the other kids at daycare, and me fumbling for explanations that wouldn't break his heart the way mine had been broken. Please, my father's voice joined hers, rougher than I remembered, weighted with something I couldn't identify. We need to talk. The rain intensified, hammering against the building like nature itself was demanding I make a choice. I thought of Danny sleeping in our shared bedroom, his small body curled around the stuffed elephant they'd given him before everything fell apart. Before they'd looked at my swollen belly and tear-stained face and told me I'd made my bed, now I could lie in it. Before they'd watched me pack my life into garbage bags while their grandson kicked inside me and never said a word to stop me from walking out into the rain. My fingers found the lock, but I didn't turn it. Instead, I pressed my forehead against the cool wood and whispered, "What do you want?" "To see him," my mother said, and her voice cracked on the words. "To see our grandson." The admission hit me like a physical blow.
They knew about Danny.
Had always known. Which meant they'd chosen to stay away, chosen to let me struggle alone, chosen to pretend we didn't exist until now. Until something had changed. "It's too late," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I was turning the deadbolt. The door swung open, and there they were. Older, grayer, smaller somehow than the giants who'd loomed over my childhood. My mother's hair had gone completely silver, pulled back in the same tight bun she'd worn for 30 years. My father's shoulders curved inward like he was protecting himself from invisible blows. They looked like people who'd been carrying something heavy for a very long time. "You look good," my mother said, her eyes scanning my face with desperate hunger. Tired, but good. I almost laughed. Good? I was wearing 3-day-old clothes, my hair was falling out of a messy bun, and I had dark circles under my eyes that concealer couldn't touch. But I supposed compared to the broken 19-year-old they'd thrown out, maybe I did look good. Maybe survival looked good on me. "How did you find us?" I asked, not moving aside to let them in. "Your address was on the Christmas card," my father said quietly.
Christmas card.
The one I'd sent 3 months ago in a moment of weakness, with Danny's school photo tucked inside, and a note that simply said, "Your grandson, Daniel. Age 4. I'd regretted it the moment I'd dropped it in the mailbox, but some part of me had hoped. "We've been trying to work up the courage to come," my mother continued. "Every day for 3 months, we'd drive by, but we never." "Never what?" "Never thought I deserved an apology? Never thought your grandson deserved to know his grandparents?" The anger surprised me with its intensity, rising from some deep well I'd thought I'd sealed off years ago. "We were wrong," my father said, the words falling between us like stones. "We were scared and angry and wrong, and we've regretted it every day since." The rain had soaked through their clothes, and I could see my mother shivering. Despite everything, despite the years of hurt and silence, I found myself stepping aside. "5 minutes," I said. "Then you leave." They entered like they were walking into a church, reverent and careful. My mother's eyes immediately went to the walls, taking in Danny's artwork taped everywhere, his school certificates, the photos of him at various ages that chronicled a life they'd missed entirely. My father stood frozen in the doorway, staring at a picture of Danny on his first day of preschool, gap-toothed and grinning. "He looks like you did at that age," my mother whispered, reaching toward the photo, but not quite touching it. "He looks like his father," I said, the words sharp as broken glass. The silence that followed was deafening. We all knew what had happened to Marcus, knew why he wasn't in any of these pictures. The overdose had made the local news, and in a city like Seattle, news traveled fast through certain circles. My parents had probably known before I did. "Maurice," my mother started, but I held up a hand. "Don't. Just don't. You don't get to come here and act like you care now. You don't get to see these pictures and feel sad about what you missed when you chose to miss it. We didn't choose. You absolutely chose." The words exploded out of me, for years of suppressed rage finally finding its voice. "You chose to care more about what the neighbors would think than about your daughter. You chose to let your pride matter more than your family. You chose to throw me out when I needed you most, and you chose to stay away when Danny was born, and when he took his first steps, and when he said his first word, which was mama, by the way, because that's all he had." My mother was crying now, silent tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. My father's hands were clenched at his sides, his jaw working like he was chewing words he couldn't swallow. "We know," he said finally. "We know we failed you. We know we failed him. But we're here now, and we're asking." "Mommy." The small voice from the hallway stopped all of us cold. Danny stood there in his dinosaur pajamas, rubbing sleep from his eyes, his dark hair sticking up in impossible directions. He looked so small, so vulnerable, and I felt my heart clench with the familiar fierce protectiveness that had kept me going through the darkest days. "Hey, baby," I said softly, moving toward him. "It's okay. Go back to bed." But Danny's curious eyes had already found my parents, and he was studying them with the intense focus he usually reserved for new insects or complicated Lego instructions. "Who are they?" he asked, and the innocence in his voice nearly broke me. I looked at my parents, saw the naked longing on their faces, the way my mother's hands trembled as she looked at her grandson for the first time. This was the moment I'd imagined 1,000 times, the moment I'd dreaded and hoped for in equal measure. "There," I started, but the words stuck in my throat. "We're grandparents," my mother said, her voice barely above a whisper. Danny's eyes widened, and he looked between them and me with the kind of wonder reserved for discovering that Santa Claus might actually be real. "I have grandparents?" he asked, and the hope in his voice was like a knife to my chest. Before I could answer, before I could figure out how to navigate this minefield of emotion and history, my father stepped forward. His face had gone pale, and he was staring at something behind Danny, something in the hallway that I couldn't see from where I stood. "Maurice," he said, his voice strange and hollow. "What is that?" I turned to follow his gaze, and my blood turned to ice. There, barely visible in the shadows of the hallway, was the edge of something that shouldn't be there. Something that would change everything my parents thought they knew about our life, about why I'd really been so desperate to keep them away. Something that would make them understand that some secrets are kept not out of shame, but out of necessity. The wheelchair sat in the shadows like a silent guardian, its chrome frame catching the dim hallway light. Danny's wheelchair, the one he'd needed since the accident 8 months ago, the one that had turned our already complicated life into something resembling a medical maze. The one I'd hidden from every photo I'd ever sent, every update I'd ever given to anyone who might pass information along to my parents. My father's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, recognition, and then something that looked like physical pain. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes darting between Danny and the chair as understanding crashed over her like a wave. "Danny," I said carefully, my voice steady despite the chaos in my chest, "why don't you show our guest your room while I make some tea?" But Danny was already moving toward his chair with the practiced efficiency of a child who'd adapted faster than any adult ever could. He transferred himself with the kind of grace that had taken months to develop, months of physical therapy and tears and small victories that my parents knew nothing about. "I can show you my Lego city," Danny said to my parents, his excitement genuine and heartbreaking. "I built it so all the buildings have ramps, and the cars can fit wheelchairs inside. Mommy says I'm an engineer." My mother made a sound that was half sob, half gasp. My father just stood there, frozen, as Danny wheeled past them toward his room with the casual confidence of a child who'd never known the world to be anything other than what it was. "How?" my mother whispered once Danny was out of earshot. "Car accident," I said, the words coming out flat and clinical. "Drunk driver ran a red light. Danny was in his car seat in the back. I walked away with bruises. He didn't." The silence stretched between us like a chasm. I could hear Danny in his room, narrating his Lego city to himself, explaining the accessible features he designed with the matter-of-fact tone of someone who'd never questioned why the world needed to be different for him. "Why didn't you tell us?" my father asked, and for the first time since they'd arrived, his voice held no judgment, only pain. "Tell you what? That your grandson, the one you'd never met, the one you'd pretended didn't exist, was hurt? That I spent 3 weeks sleeping in a hospital chair while he learned to move again? That I had to quit my job to take care of him full-time?" I moved to the kitchen, needing something to do with my hands. "What exactly would you have done with that information?" "We would have come," my mother said, following me. "We would have helped." "No, you wouldn't have." I filled the kettle with more force than necessary, water splashing against the sides. "You would have felt guilty, maybe sent a card, possibly some money. But you wouldn't have come, because coming would have meant admitting you were wrong, and you've never been good at that." My mother flinched like I'd slapped her, but she didn't deny it. Instead, she looked around our small kitchen, taking in the details I'd never thought about until now: the lowered counters I'd installed so Danny could help with cooking, the step stool that folded flat against the wall, the refrigerator covered with appointment cards for physical therapy and occupational therapy, and the dozen other specialists who'd become part of our routine. "This is why you moved," my father said, understanding dawning in his voice. "The apartment. It's accessible. Ground floor, wide doorways, roll-in shower." I confirmed. "Took me 6 months to find something we could afford that would work for him. The waiting list for accessible housing is 2 years long. Did you know that?" "Of course you didn't." "Why would you?" The kettle whistled, sharp and insistent. I poured water over tea bags with shaking hands, the familiar ritual giving me something to focus on besides the way my parents were looking at me, like they were seeing me for the first time, like they were finally understanding the weight I'd been carrying alone. "Mommy," Danny's voice called from his room. "Can they see my city now?" "In a minute, baby," I called back, then turned to face my parents. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to go in there, and you're going to look at his Lego city, and you're going to tell him it's amazing. You're not going to ask him about the accident. You're not going to look at him like he's broken, and you're not going to cry where he can see you."
"Can you do that?"
My mother nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. My father cleared his throat and straightened his shoulders like he was preparing for battle. "And after that?" he asked. "After that, you leave. And you decide whether you want to be grandparents or strangers, because I won't let you be something in between." He's been through enough without having people drift in and out of his life. We walked to Danny's room together, and I watched my parents' faces as they took in the space I'd created for him. The bed was low to the ground for easy transfers. The toy shelves were at wheelchair height. The Lego city sprawled across a large table that could accommodate his chair, complete with tiny ramps and accessible buildings that showed an imagination far beyond his 4 years. "This is the hospital," Danny said, pointing to a white building with a red cross. "It has an elevator and everything." And this is the school. See how the playground has swings that wheelchairs can use? I invented those. My father knelt beside Danny's chair, his eyes level with his grandson's. You invented accessible swings? Uh-huh. Mommy says I'm good at solving problems. She says that's what engineers do. They see problems and fix them. Danny's face lit up with pride. Want to see the fire station? It has a ramp for the fire trucks and the firefighters. For the next 20 minutes, I watched my parents discover their grandson. Really discover him, not the idea of him they'd carried in their heads, but the actual child, brilliant, funny, resilient, and completely unaware that anyone might see his wheelchair as anything other than another part of who he was. My mother asked questions about his Lego techniques. My father marveled at the engineering solutions Danny had created. Neither of them mentioned the chair, the accident, or the years they'd missed. They just focused on him, on who he was right now in this moment. When Danny started yawning, I knew it was time. Okay, engineer, I said softly.
Back to bed.
It's way past your bedtime. But I want to show them my drawings, Danny protested, but he was already rubbing his eyes. Tomorrow, my mother said, then caught herself. I mean, if your mommy says it's okay. Danny looked at me with hopeful eyes. Can they come back tomorrow, Mommy? I want to show Grandma my robot designs. The word grandma hit my mother like a physical blow. She pressed her hand to her chest and nodded, unable to speak. We'll see, I said, helping Danny transfer back to his bed. Sleep first, then we'll talk about tomorrow. I tucked him in, kissed his forehead, and turned off the light. My parents waited in the hallway, and I could see the questions burning in their eyes, the regret, the desperate need to somehow make up for lost time. He's remarkable, my father said once we were back in the living room. He's everything, I replied. He's my whole world, and I've protected that world from people who might hurt it, including you. We understand, my mother said. We understand why you didn't tell us, why you kept us away. But Maurice, we want to be part of his life. We want to be part of your life. It's not that simple. You can't just show up and expect. I was interrupted by the sound of my phone buzzing on the coffee table. The caller ID made my stomach drop. Seattle Children's Hospital. I grabbed the phone, my heart already racing. Ms. Lim? This is Dr. Rodriguez. I'm sorry to call so late, but we've been reviewing Danny's latest MRI results, and we need you to come in first thing tomorrow morning. There's something we need to discuss. The phone slipped from my numb fingers, clattering to the floor. My parents were staring at me, alarm written across their faces, but I couldn't focus on them. All I could think about was the last time a doctor had called with something to discuss, and how that conversation had changed everything. What is it? My mother asked, but her voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. I picked up the phone with shaking hands, my mind already racing through possibilities. None of them good. Danny had been having headaches lately, complaining that his vision was blurry. I'd thought it was just fatigue from school, from adjusting to his new normal. But what if it wasn't? What if the accident had caused more damage than we'd known? What if? Maurice, my father's voice cut through my spiraling thoughts. What did the doctor say? I looked at them, these people who just walked back into our lives, who just met their grandson for the first time, who had no idea that our carefully constructed world might be about to crumble again. They want to see us tomorrow, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. About Danny's MRI results. The words hung in the air between us like a death sentence. Outside, the rain continued to fall, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear the sound of sirens, ambulances racing towards someone else's emergency, someone else's moment when everything changed. But as I stood there in my living room, surrounded by the evidence of the life I'd built for my son, I realized that for the first time in 4 years, I wasn't facing the unknown alone. My parents were here, and despite everything, despite the years of silence and hurt, they were looking at me like they were ready to stay. The question was, would I let them? The waiting room at Seattle Children's Hospital smelled like industrial disinfectant and broken dreams. I sat between my parents, Danny on my lap despite the fact that he was getting too big for it, his small hands fidgeting with the zipper on my jacket. We'd been waiting for 20 minutes. 20 minutes of watching other families receive news that would either lift them up or destroy them completely. My mother kept checking her watch. My father stared at the motivational posters on the walls like they held the secrets of the universe. None of us had slept after the phone call. We'd spent the night in my living room, drinking coffee and not talking about all the things that could be wrong, all the ways our fragile new beginning could end before it really started. Danny Lim. A nurse appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand, professional smile firmly in place. I stood on unsteady legs, Danny's weight familiar and comforting in my arms. My parents rose too, and for a moment I almost told them to stay behind. This was my burden, my responsibility, my child. But then I saw the way my mother's hands were shaking, the way my father's jaw was set with determination, and I realized they weren't here as observers. They were here as family. "You can come too," I said quietly, and the relief on their faces was almost painful to witness. Dr. Rodriguez's office was smaller than I remembered, cramped with medical texts and family photos that reminded me she had children of her own, children who presumably went home healthy every night. She gestured for us to sit, and I kept Danny on my lap while my parents flanked us like protective bookends. "Thank you for coming in so quickly," Dr. Rodriguez said, pulling up images on her computer screen. "I wanted to discuss Danny's MRI results in person because I know how frightening phone calls can be." My heart hammered against my ribs. Danny was playing with a small toy car he'd brought, making quiet engine noises, blissfully unaware that his entire future might be hanging in the balance. "The good news," Dr. Rodriguez continued, "is that we're not seeing any new damage from the accident. The spinal cord injury remains stable, which is exactly what we want to see." I exhaled a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Beside me, my mother's hand found mine and squeezed. "However," the doctor continued, and that single word made my stomach plummet, "we are seeing some changes in the brain scans that we need to monitor closely." The room tilted slightly. "Changes?" "There's some swelling in the area that controls vision and cognitive function. It's likely related to the original trauma, but it's presenting now, 8 months later, which isn't uncommon but does require immediate attention." My father leaned forward. "What kind of attention?" Dr. Rodriguez turned to address him, and I was grateful that someone else was asking the questions I couldn't form. "We need to start Danny on anti-inflammatory medication immediately, and we'll need to do MRIs every 2 weeks to monitor the swelling. In most cases, we can manage this medically, but, my voice came out as a croak. But if the swelling doesn't respond to medication, we may need to consider surgical intervention to relieve the pressure." The words hit me like physical blows.
Surgery.
Brain surgery. On my 4-year-old son who had already been through more than any child should ever have to endure. "What are the risks?" my mother asked, her voice steady in a way mine couldn't be. "With medication, minimal. Some potential side effects, but nothing life-threatening. With surgery." Dr. Rodriguez paused, choosing her words carefully. "There are always risks when we operate on the brain, especially in children. But Danny is strong, and we have an excellent pediatric neurosurgery team." Danny looked up at me, sensing the tension in the room, even if he didn't understand it. "Mommy, are you sad?" I forced a smile, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. "Just tired, baby. The doctor is going to give you some medicine to help with your headaches." "Will it taste yucky?" Dr. Rodriguez smiled, the first genuine expression I'd seen from her. "We have it in bubble gum flavor. Would you like that?" Danny nodded enthusiastically, and I marveled at his resilience, his ability to find joy in bubble gum medicine while the adults around him discussed the possibility of cutting into his brain. "I want to start him on the medication today," Dr. Rodriguez said, turning back to me. "And I'd like to schedule the first follow-up MRI for next week. Do you have any questions?" I had 1,000 questions, but they all boiled down to one. Would my son be okay? And that was the one question she couldn't answer. "What do we do now?" Asked instead. "Now you go home, you give him his medicine, and you try to maintain as normal a routine as possible. Children are remarkably adaptable, and Danny has already shown incredible strength. We left the hospital with a prescription bottle and a follow-up appointment card, walking into the gray Seattle morning like survivors of some natural disaster. My parents flanked Danny's wheelchair as we made our way to the parking garage, and I noticed how naturally they'd fallen into the rhythm of navigating the world with him. My father holding doors, my mother carrying the diaper bag I still packed out of habit, even though Danny had been potty trained for over a year. "Ice cream," my father said suddenly, as we reached the car.
What?
I looked at him like he'd lost his mind. "Danny should have ice cream. It's..." He checked his watch. 10:30 in the morning, which is exactly the right time for ice cream. Danny's face lit up. "Can we, Mommy?
Please?"
I wanted to say no, wanted to go home and research brain swelling and medication side effects and surgical procedures until my eyes bled. But looking at my son's hopeful face, at my father's determined expression, at my mother's encouraging nod, I realized that maybe normal was exactly what we needed. "Okay," I said. "Ice cream it is." We went to the little parlor near our apartment, the one with the wide aisles and low counters that Danny could reach from his chair. He ordered a double scoop of chocolate chip, my father got vanilla with sprinkles, and my mother chose strawberry. I couldn't eat anything, but I sat there watching 3 generations of my family share ice cream at 10:30 in the morning, and something inside my chest began to unknot. "Grandpa," Danny said, chocolate smeared across his chin, "do you want to see my robot drawings when we get home?" My father's spoon paused halfway to his mouth. "I would love that more than anything. And Grandma, you can help me design a new building for my Lego city. Maybe a hospital that's not scary?" My mother's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled. "I think that's a wonderful idea." I watched this exchange, this easy acceptance of roles and relationships that had seemed impossible just 24 hours ago, and felt something shift inside me. Fear was still there. Fear for Danny's health. Fear of letting my parents close enough to hurt us again. Fear of the unknown future stretching ahead of us. But underneath the fear was something else. Hope. "Maurice," my mother said quietly while Danny and my father debated the merits of chocolate versus vanilla, "we know we can't make up for the years we missed. We know we can't undo the hurt we caused. But if you'll let us, we'd like to be here for whatever comes next." I looked at her, this woman who'd raised me, who'd failed me, who'd somehow found the courage to show up when it mattered most. "It won't be easy," I said. "Danny's medical needs are complicated. The appointments, the therapy, the uncertainty, it's not the kind of grandparent experience you probably imagined." "We don't want easy," my father said, turning from his conversation with Danny. "We want real. We want to be part of his life, part of your life, whatever that looks like." Danny had finished his ice cream and was drawing on a napkin with a crayon the server had given him, a stick figure family with wheels on one of the figures and smiles on all of their faces. "Look," he said, holding up his drawing. "It's us. Mommy, me, Grandma, and Grandpa. We're all together." I stared at the drawing, at the simple representation of something I'd never dared to hope for. A family. Not perfect, not without complications, but real and present and willing to face whatever came next together. "Yes," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "We're all together." 3 weeks later, Danny's follow-up MRI showed the swelling had responded to medication. 6 weeks after that, his headaches were gone. 3 months later, my parents had keys to our apartment and a schedule of who picked Danny up from school on which days. 6 months later, Danny's Lego city had expanded to include a house with a garden where stick figure grandparents helped a stick figure boy plant accessible raised beds. The night before Danny's 1-year post-accident anniversary, I found my mother sitting in his room, reading him a bedtime story. My father was in the kitchen, making Danny's lunch for school the next day, carefully cutting the crusts off his sandwich the way Danny liked. "Mommy," Danny said as I tucked him in, "I'm glad Grandma and Grandpa came back." "Me too, baby," I said, kissing his forehead. "Me too." Later, after my parents had gone home to their own house, the one they'd started remodeling to be accessible for Danny's visits, I sat in my living room looking at the family photo we'd taken the week before. All 4 of us, smiling at the camera, Danny in his chair in the center, like the sun we all orbited around. It wasn't the family I'd planned for. It wasn't the life I'd imagined when I was 19 and pregnant and terrified. But it was ours, built from broken pieces and second chances, held together by love that had learned to be stronger than pride, more enduring than fear. Outside, Seattle's rain continued to fall, but inside our small apartment, we were warm and safe and whole. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. More than enough. It felt like everything.